I used to think love, the kind that lasts through time and tough times, was the glue that held people together. When I married Richard, well, let's call him Ethan now, 20 years ago, I was sure we'd grow old together, side by side, watching life change around us. I believed we could handle anything life threw at us. But what I didn't realize back then was that love isn't just about surviving the big storms. It's about getting through the quiet, empty moments too. And sometimes, love doesn't die in a fight, it dies in the silence, in the slow, steady erosion of connection. At 39, I found myself standing at the kitchen sink, my hands buried in warm, soapy water, staring blankly at the drain. I was trying to remember the last time Ethan had looked at me the way he used to, like I mattered, like we were still us. But lately, he'd become more like a ghost in our home. He was there, sure, but he wasn't present. He'd come home late most nights, offering tired smiles that didn't reach his eyes, then disappear into his office, shutting the door behind him. When he did talk, it was surface-level stuff, nothing real, nothing deep. I told myself it was just work stress, just life being life. I convinced myself it would pass. But then my son, Adrian, let's call him Liam now, shattered that fragile illusion. It was a regular evening when Liam came home, but the tension in the air was anything but normal. He walked in, his face carefully blank, but his body language screamed that something was wrong. He dropped his bag by the door with a thud, then just stood there, frozen, like he didn't know how to start. Finally, he spoke, and his voice had this weird mix of hesitation and pain that made my stomach drop. "Mom," he said quietly, too calmly, "we need to talk." I wiped my hands on a dish towel, forcing a smile that felt fake even as I did it. My heart started racing, and I knew this wasn't about some teenage drama. This was bigger. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on?" He hesitated, shifting his weight like he was gathering courage. His eyes flicked down, then back up to meet mine. "I saw Dad today," he began, his words slow and deliberate. "He was with someone." A cold chill shot down my spine, and I felt my hands go numb. My brain was trying to process what he just said, but the words hung in the air like they didn't make sense. "With someone?" I echoed, my voice sounding strange even to me. Liam nodded, his jaw tight. "Yeah. After school, I went to get coffee with some friends, and I saw him. He was parked near campus. At first, I didn't think much of it, you know, his office is nearby, and he meets people for work sometimes. But then, he swallowed hard, like the words were stuck in his throat. I saw Miss Carter. My computer teacher." I blinked, trying to make sense of what he was saying. Miss Carter, let's call her Miss Harper, was young, probably in her late 20s. She was strict but kind, and the idea of her being involved in this felt so wrong, so out of place. "What does she have to do with this?" I asked, even as a sick feeling started to twist in my gut. Liam's face darkened. "I saw him pick her up. And before she got in the car, he kissed her." The room seemed to tilt around me. All I could hear was the hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second dragging out longer than the last. I wanted to laugh, to tell Liam he was wrong, that Ethan would never do something like that. But the look in his eyes, raw and honest, told me he wasn't lying. He was sure. And that certainty hit me like a punch to the chest, leaving me breathless. A heavy, suffocating weight settled deep inside me, twisting painfully. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I cleared my throat, but it felt like I was choking. "You're sure?" I managed to ask. Liam's jaw tightened. "I wish I wasn't," he said, his voice cracking. I could see the pain in his eyes, and it broke my heart. He didn't want this to be true any more than I did. But it was. The truth was there, hanging between us like a dark cloud. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Had I been blind this whole time? Had I ignored the signs? The late nights, the distance, the way he barely touched me anymore? Had I been so wrapped up in denial that I didn't see the cracks forming? Or had I just chosen not to look? "Mom," Liam said softly, his voice tentative now, like he was afraid of saying too much. "I didn't want to tell you, but I couldn't keep this from you." I reached out for the counter, gripping the edge like it was the only thing keeping me upright. The cool granite was grounding, but my hands were shaking. "Thank you for telling me," I whispered, though the words felt empty. Liam hesitated, then stepped closer and wrapped his arms around me. His hug was warm, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself be held. I let my guard down, just for that moment, because in that moment, I didn't have the strength to hold it up anymore. I felt like I was coming undone, and Liam's quiet strength was the only thing holding me together that night. Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with questions and disbelief. The wind outside rattled the windows, eerie sound that matched the turmoil inside me. Ethan, let's stick with that name, came home late again, just like he had so many times before. But this time, I didn't pretend to be asleep when he slid into bed beside me. I lay there, stiff and tense, my heart pounding as Liam's words echoed in my head, he kissed her. I turned my head slightly, my eyes landing on Ethan. His back was to me, his breathing deep and steady, completely unaware that everything between us was crumbling. For a long time, I just watched him. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt nothing, just a cold, hollow emptiness where love used to be. The man lying next to me, the man I'd shared my life with for so long, felt like a stranger. The next morning, I went through the motions like a robot. Ethan left early, like always, barely glancing my way. If he noticed the silence between us, he didn't show it. He just grabbed his coffee, checked his phone, and walked out the door, carrying that same distant air he'd had for months. It was like I didn't even exist to him anymore. Liam was waiting for me in the kitchen when I finally made it downstairs. "Did you sleep?" he asked, his voice soft but laced with concern. I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. "Not really," I managed to say. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, his face etched with worry. "You don't have to pretend to be okay, Mom." I forced a smile, though it felt unnatural, like my face had forgotten how to do it. I reached out and brushed my fingers against his cheek. "I'll be fine," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. Liam didn't seem convinced. He didn't argue, but his eyes stayed on me, searching for cracks in my facade. The day passed in a blur. Work, errands, the usual routine. I went through it all without really being present. My mind was somewhere else, stuck on Ethan, on what Liam had told me, on the emptiness that had taken root in my chest. Every time I thought about him, I felt a chill, like the distance between us was growing wider and wider. I was drifting, slipping away, and nothing seemed to matter anymore, not the house, not the bills, not the life we'd built together. I was just an observer now, watching everything fall apart from the outside. Through it all, Liam stayed close. He hovered protectively, checking in on me, making sure I ate, sending me texts throughout the day just to remind me he was there. I didn't realize how much I needed him until then. That evening, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea, wrapped in a blanket that felt too thin to offer any real warmth. I stared at nothing, the silence in the room pressing down on me. Liam sat beside me, his presence steadying, his body warm against mine. "Are you going to confront him?" he asked after a long stretch of silence, his voice quiet and unsure. I swallowed hard. The thought of facing Ethan, of confronting the man who had once been my whole world, was almost paralyzing. "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know what to say." Liam sighed, a sound filled with frustration and confusion. "I don't get it. How could he do this to you?" His voice cracked, and I shook my head, tears threatening to spill. I held them back. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said. "I really don't." But Liam did. He knew exactly how he felt, and in that moment, as I leaned into him, I realized I wasn't alone in this anymore. We were in it together, even if the world around us was falling apart. The next day, Ethan came home earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when I heard the front door creak open. Then Liam's sharp voice cut through the quiet of the house. "You're a liar." I froze, the knife still in my hand. A chill crept down my spine as the air in the house grew thick with tension. Silence followed Liam's words, an oppressive, suffocating silence. Then Ethan's voice broke through, low and irritated. "What are you talking about?" Liam's voice didn't soften. If anything, it grew more intense, fueled by raw emotion. "I saw you," he spat, his words sharp and cutting. "I saw you with her. I saw you kiss her. Do you have any idea what you're doing to Mom?" I moved cautiously toward the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest, just in time to see Ethan's face pale. The color drained from his features like he'd been struck. He looked from Liam to me, his mouth opening and closing, his eyes searching for words that wouldn't come. The tension in the room was suffocating, like a storm was raging between the three of us, and none of us knew how to stop it. "Anna, I don't," Ethan started, but Liam cut him off, his voice bitter and laced with anger. "You don't deserve her." Ethan spun toward him, his eyes flashing with anger, but Liam didn't back down. "Then explain it," Liam demanded, his voice firm and unwavering. Ethan hesitated, and that hesitation said everything. It was the kind of pause that made the truth undeniable. Liam scoffed, the sound bitter and full of scorn. "That's what I thought. I'd never seen my son like this, so fierce, so full of fire and raw protectiveness." His hands were clenched at his sides, his body tense with rage, his jaw set in a way I'd never seen before. He was so young, yet in that moment, he seemed so much older, like this had forced him to grow up in a way no kid should ever have to. Ethan let out a sharp breath, like the weight of the moment was finally hitting him. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to collect his thoughts, but they were scattered and lost. "It's complicated," he muttered, his voice strained. Liam let out a bitter laugh, one filled with disbelief. "No, it's not. You cheated. That's not complicated. That's just disgusting." Ethan's eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in them, regret, maybe, or guilt. He opened his mouth like he was trying to say something, but the words never came. "Anna, I don't want to hear it," I cut him off, my voice steady and cold, though underneath, there was an ocean of hurt and betrayal. "Just go." For a split second, he looked like he might argue, but then he just turned and walked away. For a moment, it looked like Ethan wanted to argue, like he was still clinging to some hope that this could somehow be fixed. But then, with a defeated sigh, he nodded slightly, as if realizing there was nothing he could say to make this right. He turned and walked away, the door slamming shut behind him. The sound echoed through the house, final and heavy, like a period at the end of a sentence I hadn't wanted to write. As soon as he was gone, Liam let out a sharp breath, his chest rising and falling like he'd been holding it in for too long. His face twisted, and I could see the anger and pain that had been building inside him. "I hate him," he muttered under his breath, his voice thick with emotion. I placed a hand gently on his shoulder, trying to steady him, but I didn't have the words to make it right, not for him, not for either of us. "Liam, no," I started, but he shook his head, his frustration spilling out. "He had everything," he said, his voice cracking. "And he threw it away." There was more than just anger in his words. There was sorrow, too, the kind that comes when someone you love lets you down in the worst possible way. I didn't know what to say. The words caught in my throat, heavy with everything we were both feeling. He turned to face me then, his expression softening. The fierceness in his eyes dimmed just enough for me to see the concern, the care, the love that had always been there. He reached out and placed a hand on my arm, his voice low but earnest. "Mom, you deserve better. So much better." His words were simple, but they hit me hard. They settled into the space between us, and for a moment, the room felt quieter, softer. My son, who had never carried this kind of weight before, had found a way to say the truth we both needed to hear. Something in me cracked. Before I knew it, I was crying. Liam pulled me into his arms without hesitation. "I've got you," he whispered. "I'll always have you." I clung to him, my fingers digging into his back, letting the warmth of his embrace steady me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. In the days that followed, Liam became my rock. I'd always known he was kind and responsible, but now I saw something different in him, something strong, unwavering. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was a man, standing by my side in a way I never expected but desperately needed. Ethan tried calling. He sent texts, leaving long-winded apologies, justifications, even excuses. But none of it mattered. He'd made his choice, and so had I. I didn't cry as much as I thought I would. Maybe I'd already done my mourning long before I even knew the truth. What hurt the most wasn't losing Ethan, it was realizing how little I'd meant to him in the end. But Liam never let me sink into that pain alone. Every morning, he made sure I had breakfast, even if it was just toast and coffee. "Eat, Mom," he'd say with a soft smile. "You'll feel better after." And he was right. He complimented me in a way that made me blush like a schoolgirl. "You look beautiful today," he said one morning as I walked into the kitchen in a simple sweater and jeans. I laughed, shaking my head. "Liam, don't be silly." "I mean it," he insisted. "You don't even realize how gorgeous you are." His words caught me off guard. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me like I was something worth admiring. Ethan used to compliment me back when we were younger, but over the years, his gaze had dulled, his words becoming more obligatory than genuine. But Liam, he looked at me like he truly saw me, like I was someone worth cherishing. And he did cherish me. At night, he'd sit with me in the living room, watching old movies just to keep me company. Sometimes, he'd wrap an arm around me, pulling me close the way he used to when he was a little boy. But now, he wasn't a child anymore. He was strong, firm, his presence warm and comforting in a way I hadn't felt in years. "You can lean on me, Mom," he murmured one evening when he noticed I was feeling down. "I'm not going anywhere." I leaned against his shoulder, closing my eyes, letting myself believe him. He never left me alone for too long. Even when he went out, he'd check in on me, texting simple things like, "Have you eaten? How are you feeling? I'm bringing you something sweet." And true to his word, he often came home with little surprises, flowers, chocolates, even a book he thought I might like. "You don't have to do this, sweetheart," I told him one night as he handed me a bouquet of soft pink roses. "I want to," he said simply. "You deserve to be spoiled." My heart ached at how effortlessly kind he was. How could I have ever thought I was alone when I had him? One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the mirror and almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked different, but because, for the first time in years, I looked alive. There was a light in my eyes that hadn't been there before, a softness in my features that had been buried under years of quiet disappointment. And it was all because of Liam. He made me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how. He held me when I felt like breaking. He reminded me every single day that I was still worthy of love, of attention, of happiness. And for the first time in a long, long time, I started to believe him. That evening, I arrived home to something completely unexpected. The lights in the house were dim, and a warm, inviting aroma filled the air. A soft glow flickered from candles set along the dining table, casting a golden hue over the room. My breath caught as I took in the sight before me. The table was set beautifully, white linen, polished silverware, and 2 glasses waiting to be filled. A bouquet of deep red roses sat at the center, their petals delicate and rich in color. The scent of a carefully prepared meal lingered in the air, mingling with something sweet, chocolate, perhaps. I stood there, speechless. Then Liam appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a cloth, a proud but slightly nervous smile on his face. "Surprise," he said, watching me closely for my reaction. I blinked, pressing a hand to my chest. "Liam, what is all this?" He set the cloth aside and stepped forward. "A special dinner. Just for you." I shook my head, trying to process it all. "You did all this?" His smile grew. "Of course. You deserve it." A wave of emotion swelled in my chest. No one had ever done something like this for me before, not in this way, not with such care. Liam pulled out my chair and gestured for me to sit. "Come on," he urged. "Let me take care of you tonight." I settled into the seat, watching in quiet awe as he moved around the table, pouring the wine, uncovering the dishes he'd prepared with such thoughtfulness. Every detail had been considered, from the seasoning of the food to the way the candles flickered just right, creating the perfect ambience. "You really went all out," I said, smiling softly. He chuckled. "You sound surprised." "I am surprised," I admitted. I met his eyes, my voice soft. "No one's ever done anything like this for me before." Something in his gaze shifted, deepening for just a moment before he said, "Then it's long overdue." We ate slowly, savoring not just the meal but the quiet warmth of the evening. Liam asked me about my day, my thoughts, my dreams, things I hadn't been asked about in a long time. And he listened. Truly listened, like every word I said mattered. After dinner, he stood up and moved toward the living room. "Where are you going?" I asked, watching him curiously. He turned, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "You'll see." A moment later, soft music filled the room, a slow, nostalgic melody that wrapped around us like a warm embrace. Liam returned, extending his hand toward me. Dance with me. I hesitated, caught off guard. Liam, I don't know. Please, he said gently. Just one dance. There was something so kind, so reassuring in his voice that I couldn't say no. I placed my hand in his, and he guided me into the open space beside the table. His hands rested lightly at my waist, steady and warm, while I settled mine on his shoulders. Together, we swayed in quiet harmony, the music surrounding us, the candlelight flickering in the background. See, he murmured. Nothing to worry about. I let out a small breath, relaxing into the moment. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythm, feeling the warmth of his presence. It had been so long since I'd felt this way, cherished. As the song played on, he leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. You're so beautiful, Mom. I looked up, my breath catching at the sincerity in his gaze. A quiet understanding passed between us, unspoken but deeply felt. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen. And as we continued to dance, I allowed myself to simply exist in that moment, feeling the warmth of being cared for in a way I hadn't realized I needed.